Hey folks, in this video we're going to talk all about ESLint, but be sure to stay to the end because we're going to show you how to migrate your existing NX projects to the latest ESLint config, the new flat config. But let's get started by talking about just what is ESLint. Well, ESLint is a tool that can analyze any piece of code and check for little errors or little pieces of lint inside of our code that may not exactly be bugs, but probably are going to trip us up or that maybe just don't make sense. So let's try adding a line to my piece of code here. I'm going to say let foo equals bar, and we can see immediately we get some red squigglies around here. And as we mouse over this, VS Code is giving us the reasons why we have a red squiggly. One of these is actually coming from TypeScript, so this is not coming from ESLint. However, the next two are coming from ESLint, and they tell us which specific ESLint rules are being violated in this line of code. In particular, I believe this is going to be an error with the default configuration. So how am I getting these red squigglies right here in my IDE? Well, the answer is because I have the ESLint VS Code extension installed. This is what's giving us this kind of heads up signal that this line of code probably has something wrong with it. So as I'm developing, I can see that immediately. I can process that signal however I want. For example, if I want to console log that line in a little bit, we can see that a couple of those warnings went away, and if we were to reassign it later, all of our squigglies are gone. But let's back out that change, because in addition to running this as we're developing inside of our IDE, we can also run this via the command line, and this is where NX comes into play. Now, if I open up a terminal, I can run the command nx run many target lint. This is going to lint all of our projects individually. Let's go ahead and hit it. Now we're able to see that most of our lints passed immediately because they were cached. And the changes that we've made so far hasn't invalidated that cache, so we really just had to relint the one project. Now when we linted this one project, we can see that ESLint found an error at line 17. And because we found this error, we actually failed this process. So rather than our lint process succeeding, it failed. And this is actually the perfect tool for making sure that we never commit bad code into our repo. Using a CI process that's going to run every time a PR is submitted, we can make sure we run this command, nx run many -- target equals lint, and that's going to make sure there's no linting errors in any of our code before it gets committed to our main branch. Now we see that the NX CLI is coming in as a way of really efficiently linting our code so that we're only linting the projects inside of our workspace that we need to. But there's another way that NX is really helping us with ESLint, and that's with setting it up. Now I actually know very little about ESLint and how it's configured because I always use NX generators. And NX generators are going to generate for us by default very sensible config for our ESLint. And this is the same config that's going to affect both our in-IDE linting and our linting at the command line level. So we can see 5 months ago I generated this ESLint-rc.json file, and this is setting the ESLint configuration for this specific project. So for example, if I really didn't like the fact that I can't commit code that uses let instead of const, rather than fixing it in my code, I could add an override to the rule for the prefer const rule. That's the one we're violating. So here we can either say off or warn. Either one of these is going to let that linting pass. We can see as soon as we make this change, if we look inside of our app.tsx file, that red squiggly has turned to a yellow one because now there's only warnings. And if we open up a terminal and rerun our run many target equals lint, we can see that this time it succeeded because we downgraded that error to a warning. This is only affecting this one app. I could also change it so that it affects my entire workspace by adding it to the root ESLint-rc JSON file. And now it will propagate to all projects due to the ESLint-rc cascade. Now the exact mechanics of the ESLint-rc cascade are actually a little bit convoluted. The idea is by default you're going to cascade upwards in the file tree. So for example, our AOA app here is going to start with the ESLint JSON file that we see on screen, and it's going to traverse up directories inside of our file system until we find another ESLint-rc file. So in this case, we're going to find this ESLint-rc at the root. And because this one has a root property set to true, we're going to stop the cascade here. Like I said, the rules are a bit tricky, and the file system cascade seems a little bit like magic because a lot of people don't assume it exists because there's this extends property where you can include ESLint-rc JSON files like we're doing here. So the fact that there is a cascade actually doesn't matter for this one because we're extending it explicitly. So in order to address these, ESLint is coming out with a new config system that they're calling flat config. The idea here is rather than supporting YAML files or JSON files or any kind of files, we're instead only going to support JavaScript files going forward, and we're getting rid of the extends keyword and the root keyword and the idea of file system cascading, and instead we're just exporting a single array of configuration objects, and what you see inside of this array is what goes. Now if we want to do something like extends, we can do like this example right here and simply import our config from another file, then include that config inside of our array. So in general, this is a big simplification for how ESLint config extends to each other. We're essentially just using JavaScript and require or import statements as a way of putting all of your config together and making it very obvious which rules are applying for a given project inside of your repo. So now comes the really cool part, because NX supports a way of automatically migrating you from this legacy ESLint RC system to the new flat config system. And it's really simple. All I have to do is open up a terminal, and we're going to run nxg convert to flat config. And that was actually it. Let's go ahead and run our lint command again, and we'll just make sure that everything is passing as it was before. Now that took a little longer because we actually had to invalidate the cache, but it was still pretty quickly because NX was able to parallelize a lot of that linting. Let's take a look at what actually changed here. I'm going to look at our AOA app first. So on the left-hand side of our screen is the old format that is actually now deleted, and on the right-hand side of the screen, this is the new eslintconfig.js file that we migrated to. Now we'll see that rather than using extends to extend our root eslintrc.json file, we're actually importing that config from the same file, but now we're just putting it inside of the array of our configuration objects. Also, rather than extending this plugin, the NX React plugin, we're now using this compatibility extension to extend that plugin. Everything else is now translated over from this overrides, and we'll notice that override that I had put in manually before to set prefer const to a warn has been updated here as well. So this generator is a really cool way of taking you right to the new ESLint flat config format. And as we can see here, even if you had manual overrides inside of your ESLint RC files, those will still be preserved thanks to the NX generator that we ran. And what's really cool here is if we generate a new library here using the command nxglib, let's create a JavaScript library, we'll call it eslint-test. We'll say none and derived. And we can see that NX generated a new library for us. Here's that eslint-test library. And if we look at the config that was generated for us for this library, we'll see that it actually matches the new flat config format. So by running our generator, not only did we put us into the new flat config, but NX is going to pick up on that flat config and continue to generate new libs using that flat config format going forward. So at the end of the day, the TLDR for ESLint is it's a really powerful tool for making sure you're not making silly errors inside of your code. And 95% of the time, you just want to stick with the default config that NX gives you. And this is kind of turning into our mission statement at NX. We want to empower you with these powerful tools without you having to go through the tedium of learning how to configure it and configuring everything properly. And sticking with that mission statement, you don't really need to know a lot about the rules of the ESLint RC system versus the flat config system. All you need to know is to get to the latest and greatest way of configuring ESLint, you just have to run the NX generator. As far as we know, it's the only way of automatically taking you from the legacy system to the current day system. So go ahead and get ahead of the curve using the new ESLint flat config. If you're using NX, it's really just as easy as running nxg convert to flat config. As always, let us know if this video was helpful to you in the comments. Let us know if you have any questions. Keep working hard, y'all, and we'll see y'all next time. Peace.